Well, I figured we should start talking about something that's going to come up more and more in this show, which is the 2020 election. And I remember back in 2016, I think you were hopeful and even wrote a piece on how Republicans could make energy a winning issue for them that year. And of course, if we remember back, energy basically played almost no role in the election. But there's pretty wide agreement that this election it will play a major issue, particularly the issue of climate change, where we have um, by my count, all 13 of the announced Democratic candidates have endorsed in one extent or another the Green New Deal. And in fact, 6 of the senators running for president uh, actually were co-sponsors of the Green New Deal. And the the Republicans, on the other hand, seem very eager to make the Green New Deal a um, an issue in the election because they think they can use it to portray the Democrats as radicals, and the Democrats think that they can use climate issue to beat down Trump and other GOP members as denialists. And so I think there's going to be a real. It's very clear that even if you take John Hickenlooper, who was the former Colorado governor, who, while he was in office, was one of the better Democrats around today on issues of oil and gas, even he's come out and supported in a kind of vague way the urgency of the Green New Deal, as he calls it. So it's clear where they're kind of congregating, and certainly Trump's position is known, but Republicans more broadly, as we've talked about, are still kind of looking for a coherent position. And it seems that a lot of what they want to do right now is not really take a position on climate, but just focus on the expense and, socialism, as they would put it, of the Green New Deal. And I think that what I would really urge is staking out a coherent, as we would put it, 100, not just on climate, but just a wider pro-freedom, pro-human policies, and then to have a really coherent position of climate falling under that. And I've not really seen any indication that that is going to happen, but I think that that is an opportunity, and missing it will be a real detriment.
Yeah, I'm really thinking about how do you influence this? I mean, I'll tell you how scary this is to me. Where I thought last week, I thought for the first time, maybe I should run for office at some
Oh
point. Or
no.
as if you know me, that is the last thing that holds any appeal to me. I mean, for a whole number of reasons, and yet it's just yeah, you can see that there's this one idealistic side that's advocating this absolute destruction, and then the other side is kind of hoping that they've moved so far that, well, people will see that they're crazy, and then they'll vote for us as non-crazy, which is a total zero type thing, like we're just the absence of something bad. And yet there is this opportunity to take the high ground, and at the very least there's just such a transparent opportunity to take the high ground on the decriminalization of nuclear power. So let me just tell everybody, particularly if there are any Republican operatives listening to this, or I mean, Democrat, if you want to run for president as a Democrat and use this, then I'll be happy to advise you as well, free of charge. But just the idea that, I mean, the way to think of CO2 emissions, if you don't know anything about the specifics of them, is just that the only ethical way to reduce CO2 emissions is in a way that uh, is by finding cost-effective sources of abundant, reliable energy that have low or no CO2 emissions. That's the only way to do it, because abundant, reliable energy is so fundamental to human flourishing, including the livability of our environment and the livability of our climate. So you need to have that as a baseline. And then, so if you're concerned about CO2 emissions, you want to do whatever you can to facilitate the development of low or no carbon, affordable abundant, reliable energy sources. That's what you have to do. And we've got this huge opportunity because the one that has by far the most promise, nuclear power, has a much better track record than anything else of being affordable in the past, except that it's been criminalized. So what we should do is figure out how to define a policy for decriminalizing it and to make that the centerpiece of so many things. And you can see that there's just this, there's a really exciting movement developing, a pro-nuclear movement. You can see this with, we've mentioned on the show before, Michael Schellenberger, and Mike is doing really, really good work publicizing the benefits of nuclear, and then also the many negatives of what I call the unreliables of solar and wind. And he's really getting, I think, a deserved following. And I can see just on Twitter, among other places, that you see a lot of really smart tech people, science people, the type of people who are concerned about CO2 emissions. I don't think they've maybe studied them. I don't think they have nearly enough precision about their magnitude and a whole bunch of other things. But nevertheless, people who say, okay, this seems like a concern, let's figure out a truly efficient pro-technology, pro-human way of dealing with it. And then nuclear seems obvious. And then there are so few people who are pro-nuclear, and you've got Schellenberger doing a really good job. So he's getting a following. You can see, well, Patrick Moore is getting a good following for a whole bunch of reasons, including for being pro-nuclear. I'm just seeing this, the anti-nuclear left is so vulnerable right now, and yet they've codified being anti-nuclear into the Green New Deal, which really exposes it as anti-industrial, anti-technology versus pro-environment and pro-long-term thinking. So what we can see is just there's so much to gain from being pro-nuclear right now. And then I think more broadly should be pro-human, but definitely this pro-nuclear opportunity. So Republicans, if you're interested and you're running, happy to talk about the specifics of how to put together a nuclear decriminalization platform. But that is your silver bullet, if there ever was one. There are a lot of other things that you can do, but that is the silver bullet.
Alex, let me just one thing to clarify, just so that we're totally accurate. The official Green New Deal does not take an explicit position on nuclear, although many of its supporters do. It was the initial FAQ that Ocasio-Cortez's office backed off on that was explicitly anti-nuclear. So we should acknowledge
what
that.
does it say right now? It just says 100%. What is it? How does it word it?
I don't know the exact wording.
It doesn't
but
have renewable in it?
I'd have to double check, but my understanding is that it doesn't explicitly bar nuclear.
Okay, well, let me say something about this, and then one of you two can look this up as we're talking, because it is important to clarify this right now. So I appreciate you jumping in. Just in general, this obsession with renewable needs to end. It's, clean is a problematic kind of terminology, but definitely renewable as an ideal, just throw that out. Nobody should be using that. If you're concerned about CO2, then you can talk about low carbon or no carbon. And then even then in practice, you have to be really aware of things like the unreliables generating a ton of CO2 emissions, and people just denying that. They're treating renewable as zero carbon, which is a whole mistake. But definitely just this dogma of, we want technologies that somehow come from these sustainable natural sources, instead of, we want the technologies that now and for the foreseeable future can provide the best energy for our lives. If you look at the full context, the second way is the way to think of it. I've talked probably before, maybe not on the show, but you don't want a renewable cell phone. You want the best cell phone. You don't want the renewable medical solution. You want the best medical solution. You don't want a renewable skyscraper. You want the best materials in your skyscraper. And you don't want renewable energy. You want the best energy. Okay, did either of you figure out what it says in terms of the Green New Deal?
So I'm not 100% confident this is the final wording, but from what I'm seeing, the resolution calls for meeting 100% of the power demand in the United States to clean, renewable, and zero emissions energy sources, which would seem to go to your point. However, so this report at least puts it that in lieu of a totally carbon free economy, it sets up a net zero one where carbon emissions are canceled out, leaving on the table both nuclear and dirty energies outfitted with carbon capture mechanisms. So,
Okay, that's not true though. That's not that qualification. That's someone's editorial, right? I mean, the neutralization. I agree with, like the offsetting, and I'm sure there would be plenty of those kinds of usually scams. But if it's saying, I mean, they're talking about clean, renewable. Like renewable is in it, and it's definitely not including nuclear in any clear way. I mean, maybe somebody's saying, "Oh, there's a backdoor," or something like that, but it's explicitly saying it has these attributes, which interestingly, none of the renewable ones have the attribute of being zero carbon. So it'll be interesting to see what they figure out with that one. But okay, so I appreciate that qualification. We want to be as accurate about these things as possible, but I do think so. The Green New Deal is overwhelmingly saying 100% renewable as the ideal, and this ideal is portrayed other places, and there's just a huge opportunity to challenge that and to say no, we are pro, the best form of energy. We want the superior form of energy, and that we think that nuclear can be that, and we definitely want to decriminalize it. And then if you really want to portray your opponents as maniacs, show that they claim to care about CO2 emissions and then oppose the best way to reduce CO2 emissions. That's the way to show them as clear maniacs.